Hello, my name is Andrew Newton, and my thesis topic is Make America Good Again, Redeeming America's Lost Sense of Virtue. A universal tendency of humankind is to complain. The average person complains about 30 times in one day. In America, complaints yearning for the ways of the past and grappling with the changes of the present are common. Statements such as, "The world is going to pot," or "Things aren't the way they used to be," and "Back in the good old days, this never would have happened," are frequently said and heard in everyday gatherings. While these complaints are often mere gripes about how adolescents disrespect the elderly or about how new inventions change the old ways of life, they carry with them a universal truth. Anything created good will slowly decay into a lesser form. Whether it is a building rotting, a painting fading, or a government devolving into a more despotic form. America's commitment to virtue and the values of truth, beauty, and goodness is currently undergoing this natural decaying process. Without a renewed commitment to virtue and the values of truth, beauty, and goodness, America becomes at risk of losing its identity as the land of the free and the home of the brave. On a dark, cold, and rainy night in 800 AD, a group of young men battled the waves of the raging Irish Sea. They carried with them a treasure, so vital to its recipients that it was worth sparring with the seas. They struggled in their small rowboat, fighting to stay upright and at the same time protect the treasure that they carried with them. Worn and beaten, they painstakingly reached the shore the next morning. These young men knew that the journey that they had made would change the course of history. Cities, countries, and even civilizations would be forever impacted by their actions. These young men were priests of the Order of Iona, a small island in between Ireland and Scotland, and the treasure that these young men carried with them was far more valuable than that of gold, diamonds, or precious stones. It was books, classical and biblical texts that had been lost for centuries. After the fall of the Roman Empire, barbarians such as the Vandals, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths burned all texts in mainland Europe and in England. Europe, bookless and therefore cultureless, had fallen into a time period of illiteracy and poverty, commonly known as the Dark Ages. However, this tiny island's monastery went unnoticed and untouched by the barbaric peoples. The priests preserved and compiled all texts and manuscripts that they had, forming a compilation commonly known as the Book of Kells, waiting for the proper moment to reintroduce their essentials lost to the world. Because of these priests, core values of civilization returned to Europe. Ancient stories and traditions were remembered. Religion returned to a largely faithless continent, and scholarly ambitions and pursuits were once again realized. These priests brought about change that rejuvenated the exhausted and stale culture of ancient Europe. They resurrected and breathed life into a dead and stagnant society. In a similar vein, America currently experiences illiteracy in morality and in virtue. The philosophy of emotivism, while claiming to lift a burden, has in reality erased moral responsibility and reason from society, and has plunged America into its own moral dark age. Once again, it is time for the bearers of truth to bring back the priceless treasure of virtue to American soil and prevent it from losing its moral literacy. The terms of virtue, truth, goodness, beauty, and American virtue must be defined for this paper to have any meaning. Virtue will be defined as the practices, habits, and actions which cause a man to prosper internally and to benefit those around him. Truth will be defined as that set of morally guided and driven principles which govern what a man should do. Goodness will be defined as the exercising of virtues, both in balance and in abundance. Beauty will be defined as the quality of being created or designed with care and virtue. American virtue will be defined as that set of Judeo-Christian ideals which the Founding Fathers attempted to exemplify in their own lives and heavily emphasized in the founding documents of America. In the United States of America and throughout the Western world altogether, the values of truth, goodness, and beauty have been disappearing. Scottish philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre is an expert on this shifting of values core to Western civilization. He describes this shifting as not a change in morality, but the loss of it. He states in his book, After Virtue, what once was morality has to a large extent been destroyed, and that this marks a degeneration, a grave cultural loss. MacIntyre devotes himself to demonstrating the ways that morality has been lost and identifying its destroyer. Throughout history, great civilizations have thrived while their founding values remained constant. The fall of the Egyptian, Roman, and Holy Roman empires occurred at nearly the same time as a major shifting in their founding values. The Egyptians made way for the Greek and for the Roman gods. The Roman deities were replaced by the newfound religion of Christianity, and the Holy Roman Empire was undermined by the Protestant Reformation. America was founded on the value of the pursuit of virtue. Founding fathers such as Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson devoted years of their lives to transcribing how well they had been true to a list of virtues that they had compiled. This fervent dedication to virtue appears at best to be a minor issue to many of the media elites and few political leaders of present-day America, and the values of what is true, good, and beautiful are being undermined. If action is not taken to revert to the principles of the founding of America, one can only worry that the nation of America will follow suit in the same pattern as the other great civilizations before it. When the foundations of a house begin to crumble, the house itself starts to collapse. In the same way, without the ideals that America was founded on being commonly practiced and praised, America will descend into tyranny, anger, and conflict, and will ultimately dissolve or be conquered. The United States of America must recover a common commitment to American virtue in order to prevent its destruction. The United States of America has a unique form of government. It is not a pure democracy, nor is it entirely a confederated republic, nor is it solely a constitutional government. It is a unique combination of the three, combining the strengths of each while also containing some of the weaknesses that these types of governments present. Specifically, democracies have been discussed by philosophers throughout history. French philosopher Montesquieu, in his Spirit of the Laws, identifies the singular quality that is most needed for a popular government to succeed. He says, "In a popular state, one spring more is necessary, namely, virtue. Without the spring of virtue flowing, the government and state of a popularly elected government cannot and will not succeed." George Washington, in his farewell address, also stressed the need for organized morality and virtue, stating, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. When the government is elected by the people and controlled by the people, the character of the people determines the fate of the nation. If the people's morality is not grounded, resolute, and accepted, then the nation will fail." James Fenimore Cooper, in The American Democrat, argues that the main weakness of democracies is that they are extremely liable to popular impulse, and often, as a result, make rash decisions. He also proposed that democracies often substitute public opinion for law. In other words, a radically democratic government allows for hot topics and for fits of passion to entirely determine the direction in which a government treads. All of these philosophers clearly emphasize the need of the common people and democracies to excel on moral grounds. The ancient values of truth, goodness, and beauty are essential to the well-being of America. One of the main ideals today that threatens to tear apart our understanding of virtue is the philosophy of emotivism. McIntyre dates this philosophy back to 1903 and names the founder as English philosopher George Edward Moore. In his work Principia Ethica, Moore outlines the three central claims of emotivism. Moore first argues that goodness is a single, undefinable property, not naturally occurring, and differing from that of aiding survival or pleasantness. According to Moore, claims of actions having inherent goodness or badness are faulty and have no proof. They are merely intuitions. Moore's second claim is that every action is to be solely evaluated on the consequences of that action and compared with the other possible outcomes of other possible courses of action. He then follows with a key and bold statement. No action is ever right or wrong as such. Anything whatsoever, under certain circumstances, may be permitted. This is commonly known in the realm of philosophy as utilitarianism. Moore's final claim is perhaps by far his most audacious. Personal affections and aesthetic enjoyments include all the greatest and by far the greatest goods we can imagine. This is the ultimate and fundamental truth of moral philosophy. These three claims of Moore's are all commonly accepted in the mass culture of society today, and as a result, the values of truth, goodness, and beauty have been corrupted. Truth is a concept that is highly debated. What is true? How can one be sure? Does truth even exist? These are all questions that are frequently asked in today's society. The first two questions are productive. They seek to increase knowledge, to gain understanding, to build up strong moral foundations. This last question, however, tears down progress and sets back our society. Across the country, in the media and in the elite, there has been a denial of truth itself, or at the very least, objectivity. This has been replaced with the modern ideal of your truth, a seemingly uplifting but ultimately detrimental ideal. You see, your truth is nothing more than your desires or your personal preferences. Personal preferences, whatever they are, have become the values that one should follow because the self is autonomous and knows what is best for itself and how best to take care of itself. This idea is countered by Professor of Christian Studies at Houston Christian University, Nancy Pearcey, in her book, Saving Leonardo, when she says, "It is not merely a matter of private individuals making private choices. Rather, it is about deciding which worldview will shape our communal life together. Feelings cannot be used as the primary source of morality, because feelings change on a whim and often are wrong. Truth, then, is the first of the essential ancient ideals to have been corrupted by the philosophy of emotivism. Goodness has been replaced by the modern ideal of self-love. Many would argue that this is validated by the introduction to the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson lists the pursuit of happiness as an inalienable right. However, happiness had a far different connotation in revolutionary America than it does in present-day Western culture. American legal scholar Jeffrey Rosen, in his book, The Pursuit of Happiness, says, "Today, we think of happiness as the pursuit of pleasure. But classical and Enlightenment thinkers instead thought of happiness as the pursuit of virtue, as being good rather than feeling good. With consideration of this fact, one can easily see how the original intention behind the Declaration of Independence has been radically shifted. Once the definition of happiness changed, the pursuit of happiness devolved from self-improvement into self-seeking benefit." C.S. Lewis argues in Mere Christianity that all humans experience a sense that differentiates between right and wrong and good and bad, called the law of human nature. They may not always follow this law of human nature, but when they do not, they make an excuse as to why they did not, rather than saying that there was no law in the first place. MacIntyre adds to this idea, and if the rules of morality are binding on all rational beings, then the contingent ability of such beings to carry them out must be unimportant. What is important is their desire to carry them out. So then, the desire to emulate goodness is essential to an American and to America. Beauty is the final target of emotivism. The media has been riddled with messages of self-love, the embracement of living how one wants, and the need to listen to nothing but one's own desires. An excellent example of this can be found in the Disney movie Frozen. One of the two main characters, Queen Elsa, runs away from home and builds herself an ice palace, during which she sings, "No right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free." While this may only seem like the joyous exclamation of a young adult experiencing liberty for the first time, it subtly conveys the message that the very concepts of right and wrong are themselves oppressive, and that ridding oneself of them brings greater personal freedom and happiness, and is to be desired. The movies people watch, the books people read, and the music people listen to affect the worldview of a secular society almost as much as any other factor. Piercy specifically challenges Christian artists to revert the message of beauty back to the core gospel and to reveal the breathtaking beauty of salvation. Many would argue that pursuing virtue on the scale of an entire country is impossible. This is true. It is impossible for every single person in a country the size of America, or any country for that matter, to pursue living a life of virtue. Because of the sinfulness of human nature, it is impossible for even a single individual to properly and completely pursue virtue. However, just because a goal cannot be fully attained does not mean that one should still not try to attain the essence of that goal. Founding Father Benjamin Franklin devoted years of his life to compiling a list of virtues and attempting to live them out to perfection. These virtues were temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. At the end of his life, he said, "Though I never arrived at the perfection I had been so ambitious of obtaining, but rather fell far short of it, I became by the endeavor a far better and a far happier man than I otherwise should have been." It is important to recognize that progress in the right direction is better than staying in one's terrible position. This pursuit of perfection shown by Franklin was and is quite deistic, and does not reach the full potential of perfection for Christians that can only be found in joint with pursuing and following Christ. However, this deistic pursuit of perfection is still beneficial to an American and to America. Others would argue that the very idea of common virtue represses the freedom of religion ensured by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. However, it is entirely possible to follow the individual components of a religion or moral philosophy without specifically adhering to that religion or moral philosophy. The biblical components of the Golden Rule, caring for the elderly, being humble, and many passages in Proverbs are all commonly accepted in secular society as wise. One of the core tenets of Christian virtue can be found in the biblical book of Galatians, where Paul lists a series of 9 key Christian virtues. These virtues are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, and are collectively known as the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is commonly praised, even among the irreligious. However, these secular definitions of these words are vastly different than the biblical implications of these words, particularly love, joy, and peace. This difference is dangerous to the need for a common sense of virtue in America. Many emotivists would argue that the very concepts of truth, goodness, and beauty are too vague to be able to pursue. They would dismiss these as goals because they have no true definition of these terms and consider them to be subjective. Emotivists would instead argue that truth can be found in two main areas. The first is the scientific theorems and discoveries accepted by the common public as true. However, our foundation of truth must be constant, and our understanding of science is constantly growing and adapting. Leading scientists up until Copernicus and Galileo universally agreed that the sun orbited circularly around the earth. This is now known in multiple ways to be false. Furthermore, the accepted diagram of the model of an atom has changed consistently every few years over the last century. Science continuously builds on itself and is not constant. The last step of the scientific method is to retest and compare results to that of the previous conclusion. This is essential to understand. Although science's constant change to become compatible with new information is excellent and essential, it makes for a poor foundation of truth. The second avenue of truth proposed by the emotivist is the individual beliefs and experiences of an individual. It is undeniable that truth can be relative to the subject. However, truth cannot and does not rely on the subject. So-called subjective truth is mere opinion, not truth. Ultimately, the bearers of morality must return the priceless treasure of virtue back to American soil before it loses its identity and its security. The ancient values of truth, goodness, and beauty have been mocked, corrupted, and belittled in modern intellectual theory and society. Only a return to the striving for a morally excellent life can reverse America from its stage of moral decay. If the United States fails to seek to emulate the goodness with which it champions itself, it will also fail to retain its greatness and prosperity. As the philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville so aptly put, America is great because she is good. And if she ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. Thank you. I would now like to take questions from the judges.
I'll go first.
Okay.
In some ways, I think we anticipate this, right? We see it in nature, the decay. We see it in culture, the decay. As believers, we ultimately know the end, right? New heaven and new earth. So that gives us our hope in what we do. So how do we, as beings in this world, balance our national identity, making America good again, versus our kingdom identity as we seek to grow the kingdom? How do those things relate?
That's a really, really great question. I would argue that the two complement each other, and that by a desire to spread the gospel and to reach others with the message of Christ, that will ultimately end up benefiting America, because Christ is the origin himself, God is the origin himself of morality and of virtue. The reason that I make it about America is so that it's applicable to not just Christians, but to everyone in America. It would be a great thesis for me to argue why Christians should pursue Christ, but that kind of seems self-evident.
I think my question really aligns to what you just asked. I can see myself just scrolling through Facebook or making a post about, bringing back virtue. Like if you were to synthesize everything, what strong point, what statement, how would I say to a Facebook warrior, like, I guess to bring, because goodness, truth, beauty, they are so subjective. They're based on experience. They're based on, beliefs and perspective. What's a point that I could use to argue, like a synthesis of what you presented for us today?
So if I were to summarize my argument really quickly, it would be the values that a country is founded on is essential to its well-being and to its security. America was founded on Christian values and the value of pursuing virtue. Therefore, it's important for Christians today to reject an individualistic sense of virtue and to pursue virtue as a community.
I know there's a lot of,
You go ahead.
sorry,
No, you're fine.
lots of different virtues. In your thesis, we heard several people listing several virtues. If you had to pick one of these virtues to make America great again, which one would you pick?
I would pick the virtue of temperance/silence, I believe is most needed in America today. I would argue that we do not often listen to one another, and we do not often stop and reflect on what we have seen, what we have read. We need to read more. But what we have seen and read, we need to reflect more and remain in silence. And furthermore, temperance means that we are willing to listen to others, not to beat them in an argument, but to learn from them and to grow with them. I would argue that is what America needs most today.
I think you did a very good job. It's a very tough topic, and you handled it very well. I think that I don't agree with everything you say, and I'll say that out because I think it's challenging when we talk about virtue, as somebody just said. You can look to source material, obviously Paul in the Bible and other founding documents to give us a definition of what virtue is, beauty is. But sometimes beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and experience does influence. So as a 20-year-old, maybe I thought something different than I am as a 45-year-old. And then as far as the founders go, I think you just said a few minutes ago about read more, and that, I think that you'll read more. And as I've read more about the founders, I've been inspired by them, but also been challenged by them because they had their faults and their limitations as well as we have our faults and limitations. And so I'm not one to say that their vision was more virtuous than today. I think they had faults, we had faults. But on that trajectory, I think my question is still, you speak about in America, and when I think of America, I think of a landmass, I think of a government, I think of a flag, I think of a native language and native currency. But what do you think of when you think of 500 years from now? I mean, obviously there are countries that have been in existence for thousands of years, and America is a very, very young nation. And so what will, in your view, what should America be in 500 years? What is your vision of 500 years from now look like with the America that you want to be virtuous?
So with the America that I desire to be virtuous, I believe that it will probably last longer than a non-virtuous America, and I believe that because the citizens of the country will be more desirous to work hard, to work together, and to address problems that are essential to the community. I do believe that if we don't pursue virtue, it's a definite possibility that America could not at least be the leading country of the world, if still a country. If you told someone 300 years before the Roman Empire fell that it was going to fall, they would have laughed at your face. They wouldn't have believed you. And I believe that we have to consider that kind of historical pretext when we look at America today.
Thank you.
Andrew, phenomenal job. I'm super encouraged that you would venture into such an incredible topic. In your study, did you come across some guys like Francis Schaeffer or Carl Trueman, who have written a lot on kind of the cultural demise based off of the self? Did you come across any of that?
I did not read either of those sources.
Okay.
McIntyre does talk a lot about how like the philosophy of emotivism has contributed to the decline. I also read Saving Leonardo by Nancy Pearcey, and she talks about how our like media and how like our forms of art have declined in forms of virtue. I did not come across either of those people, but I would be interested to read them.
So those guys talk a lot about looking at the culture, and it's reflective of what you've argued here of the people. My question then is, do you believe that you can legislate virtue?
That's a very important question. You cannot legislate virtue in order for it to be effective. If you try to institute some sort of national religion or something like that, people are only going to be following morality for the sake of pursuing the law. Then you either come up with a bunch of grumpy people who only do it because they have to, or you have a bunch of Pharisees who try to act like they're better than one another because they're following the law to perfection.
Okay,
And so I would argue that legislating virtue and morality, it can help to some extent, but more often it will harm than do good.
phenomenal. Let me follow up. So where do you see the beginning start in the turn?
That's a very important question and a really great question. I believe it starts in individuals and their families and in their communities. The things that you were taught as you were growing up in your household often stay with you for the rest of your life. So I believe it falls largely on the parents to teach their children virtues, and if not the parents, then the mentors and the rest of the community to exemplify the pursuing of virtue so that others will as well.
Phenomenal. Good job.
If there are no further questions, thank you for your time.